David's world changed the night Claire was gone. One moment she was there, smiling with that calm warmth she always carried, and the next, she was just a memory. The house that once echoed with her laughter felt like a hollow shell, every corner whispering her absence. He walked through those empty rooms like a ghost himself, barely eating, barely sleeping, drifting through the days as though he wasn't meant to be alive anymore. And in the middle of that silence, I found myself stepping in. Not because I thought I could replace her, but because I couldn't stand seeing him break apart piece by piece. I had known David and Claire for years. They were the couple everyone admired, stable, loving, gentle with each other. To me, they had always been like family. Claire treated me like a younger brother, teasing me about my terrible cooking or how often I crashed on their couch after long nights out. David had been a steady friend, quiet but thoughtful, someone who remembered the smallest details. After her funeral, I told myself I was just going to help him get through it, just a friend offering a shoulder. But grief has a way of rearranging people, and before I realized it, I was seeing him in ways I hadn't allowed myself to before. The first week after her passing, I came over almost every day. I'd find him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. Sometimes he would speak, sometimes not. I'd cook simple meals, scrambled eggs, pasta, whatever I could manage, just to make sure he ate. He barely touched the food, but at least he was trying. One evening, when I set a plate in front of him, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said softly, "You don't have to keep doing this." I remember answering without hesitation, "Yes, I do, because you do the same for me." And he didn't argue after that. Nights were the hardest for him. That was when the silence felt unbearable, when the bed seemed too big and too cold. Sometimes I stayed over, making excuses about it being late or not wanting to drive home. In truth, I was afraid to leave him alone. One night, I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, holding one of Claire's scarves to his face. His shoulders trembled as he tried to hide his tears. I sat beside him, said nothing, just put a hand on his back. He leaned into me, his head falling against my chest, and I felt his heartbeat racing against my own. That was the first time I realized how much I wanted to protect him, not just as a friend, but in a deeper way I was almost ashamed to admit. I started noticing the little things about him I had overlooked before. The way his eyes lingered when he was lost in thought, the way his voice softened when he spoke about Claire, the way his hand would brush mine when I passed him a cup of coffee. These weren't new traits, but they felt new to me, magnified by the intimacy of grief. It was dangerous, I knew. He was fragile, and I was supposed to be his anchor, not someone who complicated his mourning with feelings I shouldn't have. But there were moments when I thought he felt it too. One night, we watched an old movie Claire used to love. David laughed at a line she always quoted, then suddenly went silent, his expression tight with pain. I reached out to squeeze his hand, and he didn't let go. We sat there like that, side by side, fingers tangled, both of us pretending it was just comfort. Yet the warmth of his skin against mine burned long after the credits rolled. Another evening. I found him asleep on the couch, the television still playing. I covered him with a blanket, and when I tried to pull away, he caught my wrist in his sleep, murmuring my name. My chest tightened as I froze, watching his lips part with that unconscious trust. I told myself it meant nothing. He was lonely, vulnerable, reaching for the nearest hand. But deep down, I could ignore how much it meant to me. The guilt was already blooming inside me. Claire had been my friend. She had trusted me, welcomed me into their home countless times. To want him now, after she was gone, felt like a betrayal, not just to her memory, but to him as well. And yet, I couldn't stop the thoughts creeping in when I saw him smile faintly at something I said, or when his shoulder brushed mine as we washed dishes together. I tried to bury it, to focus on being what he needed most, steady, reliable, safe. But late at night, lie awake on the guest bed, I would hear his footsteps pace in the hallway, and I would ache with the urge to get up to hold him, to tell him he wasn't alone. The line between friendship and something else was blurring, and neither of us dared to acknowledge it. Still, every time he leaned on me, every time he looked at me with eyes filled with both pain and trust, I knew we were walking closer to something neither of us could turn back from. And when one night he fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck, I sat there frozen, knowing my heart was already too far gone. The days stretched into weeks, and the bond between David and me became a rhythm neither of us planned, but both of us relied on. He began calling me more often, not just when he felt overwhelmed, but for simple things, helping him shop for groceries, fixing a squeaky door, keeping him company on long walks. What started as small acts of support slowly became something neither of us could quite name. I told myself I was only filling a void until he could stand on his own again, but my heart knew better. I was no longer just there for him. I wanted him, even if wanting him felt like crossing a line I shouldn't. David carried his guilt like a second shadow. I could see in the way he hesitated before laughing, as though joy itself was a betrayal to Claire. Sometimes he would stop mid-sentence and apologize, as if smiling in my presence somehow erased a memory. And yet, when our eyes met in those quiet moments, I saw something flicker there, something that went beyond grief. The hardest part was knowing he saw the same in me. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled in just as I arrived at his place. The sky cracked with lightning, and rain beat against the windows while we sat at the kitchen table. David poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the amber liquid like it held answers. "Do you ever feel like you're doing something wrong just by moving forward?" he asked, voice low, as though the storm might carry his words away. I hesitated, then admitted, "I think moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It just means you're still here, and you're allowed to be." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes glassy. Sometimes it feels like Claire's still in the room, watching me, watching us. His hand trembled as he lifted the glass, and before I realized it, I reached across the table and covered it with mine. The contact was small, but the weight of it pressed down on us like the storm outside. Neither of us pulled away. Nights became heavier after that. We started watching movies together again, though he rarely chose the ones he used to watch with her. He laughed more, but every laugh carried the sharp edge of guilt. One night, halfway through film, he muted the television and said, "Do you ever wonder she knew?" "Knew what?" I asked, my pulse quickening. He hesitated, then sighed. "That I leaned on you more than I should have, even when she was alive." His words stunned me. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was imagining things, but the truth was I had felt it too. There had always been a closeness between us, hidden beneath the surface, one I buried out of respect for their marriage. Hearing him say it out loud unraveled something inside me. That night, he broke. The storm had passed, but inside, his walls crumbled. He confessed how empty he felt, how sometimes he woke up reaching for her only to find cold sheets. His voice cracked, and I pulled him into my arms without thinking. He clung to me with a desperation I had never felt before, his face pressed against my neck, his body shaking. I whispered that he wasn't alone, that I was here. And then, in the middle of his sobs, his lips brushed mine. It was a fleeting, broken kiss, but it set fire to everything I had been holding back. I froze, torn between pulling away and giving in. His eyes searched mine, wide with shock and something more, fear, longing, relief. "I shouldn't," he whispered, but he didn't move back. Neither did I. The second kiss was slower, deliberate, and this time I kissed him back. All the guilt, all the grief, all the unspoken desire poured into it until we were both trembling. By the time we pulled apart, the silence was deafening. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, his voice raw. "You're just feeling," I whispered, "and that's okay." We ended up in his bedroom that night, not in a rush of lust, but in something deeper, something fragile and tender. Every touch carried the weight of Claire's absence. Every caress felt like a confession. He held me like he was afraid I might disappear too, and I touched him as though I could put his broken pieces back together. There was nothing polished about it. It was messy, filled with tears and whispered apologies. But it was real. Afterward, we lay in silence, our hands entwined. He stared at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling unevenly. "I haven't felt alive since she left," he said quietly. Then he turned to me, eyes shining in the dim light. "But with you, I do." His words pierced through me, filling me with both joy and dread. I wanted to believe him, But I also knew what we had just done carried a weight neither of us was ready to name. Still, when he rested his head against my chest and drifted into sleep, I held him close, knowing this was only the beginning of something we could no longer ignore. The morning after changed everything, even though we barely spoke about it. David woke before me, slipping out of bed quietly, and when I found him later in the kitchen, he looked as though he hadn't slept at all. His hair was tousled, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes carried the weight of 1,000 unasked questions. I poured myself some coffee, waiting for him to say something, but the silence stretched between us. At last he muttered, "Last night it shouldn't have happened." The word stung, but I forced myself to nod. "I know." And yet, when his hand brushed mine as he reached the mug, neither of us pulled back. The contradiction was clear. We both knew it was complicated, but neither of us regretted it. In the days that followed, we danced around the memory of that night. Sometimes he would avoid my eyes, retreating into himself. Other times, he'd look at me with such raw longing that it nearly unraveled me. I tried to give him space, reminding myself that he was still grieving, that I was supposed to be his friend first. But desire has a way of slipping through cracks, and the more we tried to suppress it, the stronger it grew. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the trees, he finally spoke. "Do you think she'd hate me for this?" His voice was barely audible, like a confession to the wind. I swallowed hard. "No, Claire loved you. She wanted you to be happy, even if she wasn't around to see it." His eyes glistened and he shook his head. "It feels like betrayal, like I'm cheating on her memory." "You're not replacing her," I said softly. "You're surviving. Loving again doesn't erase her. It just means your heart is bigger than your pain." He didn't answer, but he leaned against me, his shoulder pressing into mine. In that moment, I knew he wanted to believe me, even if guilt still lingered like a shadow. Our closeness grew into a rhythm neither of us could deny. He started calling me before bed, just to hear my voice. I stayed over more often, until my toothbrush had a permanent spot in his bathroom. And yet, every time we touched, there was hesitation, as though Claire's ghost still stood between us. One night, as we lay side by side, I whispered the truth I had carried for years. "I've loved you for longer than I can admit. Even when she was alive, I kept it buried because it wasn't fair, but it's always been there." He turned to me, eyes wide, as though the words broke something open inside him. For a long time he didn't speak, and I feared I had ruined everything. Then he reached for my hand and said, "I think I knew, and part of me wanted it too, even if I didn't understand it back then." The confession tied us together in a way nothing else could. We stopped pretending after that. We still carried guilt, but it no longer silenced us. Instead, it became something we acknowledged, something we worked through together. Slowly, we learned to laugh again, to share meals without the weight of sorrow pressing on every word. Our love didn't erase the past. It wove itself around it, creating something new. Months passed before David suggested making our relationship official. We were sitting in the garden, a place Claire had loved, when he said, "I don't want to hide anymore. If people don't understand, so be it. You're my future now." The words left me breathless. For so long, I had been a quiet presence in his life, the friend in the shadows. To hear him claim me as something more felt like stepping into sunlight after years of rain. When he proposed, it wasn't with grand gestures or elaborate plans. It was simple, intimate. Just the two of us sitting on the couch one evening. He pulled out a small ring, his hands trembling, and asked if I'd be his. Tears filled my eyes as I whispered yes, knowing that every step of our journey, every painful, guilty, tender moment, had led us here. Our wedding was quiet, private, attended only by a few close friends who understood. David wore a black suit, I wore gray, and we exchanged vows in a small garden filled with flowers Claire once planted. It wasn't about replacing her. It was about carrying her memory forward into something new. After the ceremony, we visited her grave together. David knelt, placed a bouquet of lilies on the stone, and whispered, "I found love again, Claire. I hope you can forgive me." I stood behind him, my hand resting gently on his shoulder, and for the first time since her passing, I saw peace in his eyes. He turned to me, his smile faint but steady, and said, "You're my home now." And in that moment, I realized a truth I've been afraid to speak aloud. Love doesn't always follow the rules we expect. Sometimes it grows out of loss, out of grief, out of the spaces left behind. He lost his wife, and then he married me. And in that loss, we found a new beginning neither of us thought possible.